and hand in hand with the other relevant funding platform that is available in the country. So thank you, Pak Joko. Let me check whether we still, okay, Mr. Eugene, can we have more follow-up questions on your presentations on the ASEAN taxonomy too? So in the, how is the ASEAN Taxonomy Board working towards the enhancing the interoperability of the ASEAN taxonomy? Particularly because we do now have the presentations just from the Miss Henrietta about the EU taxonomy. If you could have share your views on this.
Right. Thank you very much for the question, Ibu. So one of the principles for the development of the ASEAN taxonomy is to take into account other international taxonomies and contextualizing that for ASEAN itself. And the idea really is that we want to prevent fragmentation. We want to ensure that in ASEAN, our regional and national circumstances are taken into consideration, but at the same time, we don't want to operate in a silo. We want this to be able to link and be interoperable with other international taxonomies, because capital needs to flow efficiently and effectively. And that is the purpose of the taxonomy. So I will highlight first that one very interesting thing about the ASEAN taxonomy is that it is a taxonomy meant to facilitate transition. And that was a fairly new concept at the time the ASEAN taxonomy came out. But now we see a lot of taxonomies actually looking at transition itself. So the Australian approach is also to look at transition, and the Canadian approach is also to incorporate transition. And more importantly, the ASEAN taxonomy in facilitating a transition also tries to safeguard the just and affordable aspects. And that is why we had the social aspects as part of the essential criteria. It also allows for remediation. Now, so these are really interesting aspects of the ASEAN taxonomy, which were maybe a bit ahead of its time, but now are getting very recognized. So let me just talk about the EU taxonomy, because I think if you talk about comprehensive taxonomies, the EU taxonomy always comes to mind, right? So the ASEAN taxonomy, for example, is designed to be interoperable with the EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy has 6 environmental objectives. We have 4, but they're actually very similar. We can just fold them into each other. We use ISIC, so because it's very important that the classification system activities are compatible. EU uses NACE, we can reconcile that. We have a do no significant harm criteria, which I talked about just now. We have minimum safeguards, but to the extent of more human rights. The EU covers business ethics as well, but that's something which we can easily reconcile. We actually have the remedial measures to transition, which the EU doesn't have, but we hope that with things like the EU Commission's recommendation on facilitating finance for transition to a sustainable economy, this again can be aligned. We have